Welcome to Worthwhile Watches. About 6 months ago, I did a comparison of two digital watches in my collection, the Casio FT-500W and this Timex Expedition camper. If you haven't seen this comparison, I'll link it in the description. I did receive some comments on that first video saying the comparison was not really fair, or mentioning other watches that would be a better comparison. I do agree that the original comparison wasn't completely fair, but they were the watches I had in my collection at the time, so I was working with what I had. A couple months ago, however, I added this Casio AW-80 to my collection. So now it's time to revisit this comparison with two watches that are much more closely matched. The same Timex Expedition camper, this time against the AnaDigi Casio AW-80. This Casio has some pretty unique features, and one feature in particular has really surprised me with how useful it's been. So, let's get started. The first thing I noticed when wearing this Casio AW-80 is the strap is nicer to use than the FT-500. The AW-80's strap is a softer material and it's more flexible and pliable than the FT-500's. I find it easier to adjust the strap while avoiding any excessive bulging, and it wears more comfortably on the wrist. This strap has similar reinforced areas near the lugs and on the end of the strap and keeper, but the material seems a bit nicer with higher quality stitching and finishing. The Timex strap features a more traditional buckle with good quality material and stitching. This strap is a bit stiff initially, but it's comfortable to wear and should hold up well with use. As I mentioned in the previous comparison, the Timex strap has a hinged area near the lugs that should allow this watch to sit comfortably on just about any size or shape wrist. So the strap is a pretty big improvement for the AW-80, but I still prefer the Timex strap to the Velcro style strap found on this Casio. One thing I complained about in the first video was the tiny crown on the Casio FT-500 being a bit more difficult to manipulate than the Timex. Well, this Casio AW-80 has no crown. I was a bit surprised to see that this analog watch had no crown, but we'll talk more about the pros and cons of that feature when we discuss functionality. Aside from the strap improvements, lack of crown, and very different button configuration setup, the overall build of this AW-80 is pretty similar to the FT-500, with a resin case, stainless steel caseback, and domed acrylic crystal. Unlike the Casio FT-500, which had only one large button on the side of the watch that activates the LED light, the AW-80 has 4 buttons, 2 on each side, that control everything from mode switching to adjusting the time, activating the LED lights, and other various features, including setting the analog hands. Unlike the protruding cylindrical buttons on the Timex, the Casio's buttons are very low profile, creating a sleek, round case without anything protruding, not even a crown. The smooth buttons on the Casio are a little slippery and lack the secure tactile feedback of the Timex, but they work well and give the watch a somewhat unique, smooth profile, like a flat, rounded rock picked up from an ancient riverbed. The dials of these two watches are quite similar in design and legibility, with large numerals around the dials, except on the lower half where the digital screens replace the numerals. The Timex has a nicely incorporated curved digital display that replaces the 5, 6, and 7 numerals. The Casio's digital display is a bit bigger and can accommodate more information and larger text, but I don't like the integration of the display as much. The partially clipped numerals at 4 and 8 look a bit unrefined compared to the more purposeful-looking digital display incorporation in the Timex. But this is a minor point and just my opinion. Both are easily legible and both handsets are loomed, unlike the Casio FT-500, which had no loom whatsoever. The Casio's loom is a bit brighter initially, but they're pretty similar. Another noticeable difference is the Timex has a bright orange second hand ticking around the dial, while the Casio has no second hand at all. You have to use the digital screen to track the seconds on the Casio. Another area where Timex has an advantage is in water resistance. While the Timex and Casio FT-500 have 100-meter water resistance ratings, the Casio AW-80 is only rated for 50 meters. This doesn't make much difference to me, but it might if you're into extreme water sports. Now, let's take a look at the digital capabilities of these two watches. Like the Timex, the Casio has additional time zone tracking, alarm, timer, and stopwatch features. But the Casio has another very interesting feature called telememo. This lets you store up to 30 separate sets of data, which could be names and phone numbers or other data if you like. As you can see here, for illustrative purposes, I have someone named John entered in slot 1, along with their possible phone number. One way that I actually used this feature and found it very helpful was when I had just gotten my new bank account here in the UK, I could never remember the bank-assigned PIN number for my new debit card. So I entered it into this watch and made sure to wear it when going shopping. If I forgot my PIN, I could just press 2 buttons and there it is. It helped me learn my new phone number too. There's my name and there's a phone number. You could enter someone's address or a temporary passcode you need to know or a lock combination or anything else you might want to remember. Of course, today, this type of information can be easily stored and accessed through a phone or smartwatch, but when you're a watch geek, this way is way more fun. So that telememo feature really sets this watch apart from the Timex Expedition, but let's talk about one of the standout features of the Timex, the backlight. Can this Casio keep up? The Timex Expedition has one of the coolest backlight features that goes all the way back to the early 90s, Indiglow. Pressing the Indiglow button on the top left lights up the entire dial with a blue-green glow for as long as you press the button. But if you hold the button for 3 seconds, it will enter a 3-second mode where the display will stay on for 3 seconds with each press of the button. This can be toggled by holding the light button. The digital window on the Timex is also readable with the Indiglow activated, but the angle might need to be adjusted to get a clear view of the display. I remember being amazed the first time I saw Indiglow watches in the 90s, and it's still just as cool today. The Casio AW-80 uses an amber LED lighting system with 2 LEDs, one at the 3 o'clock and one at the 9 o'clock position. These lights do an adequate job of illuminating the dial, but the digital screen is almost impossible to read in the dark. The Casio FT-500, on the other hand, blasts the whole dial with light from a single bright amber LED located under the 6 o'clock position. The FT-500's LED also slowly fades off after about 3 seconds. I find the light on the FT-500 very satisfying to use every time. It's an amazingly powerful light for this little watch. So the light on the AW-80 is a bit disappointing by comparison, and not as cool as the Timex Indiglow either. Another advantage the Timex has over either Casio is the timing bezel. Not only does it look good on this rugged design, it's a useful feature to have. Both watches have timer and stopwatch features accessible through the digital display, but turning the bezel offers a quick, easy alternative to fiddling with buttons and tiny display screens. The timer options on both of these watches need to be set up, and it's not the easiest process to do quickly, especially if you don't use the feature regularly. The stopwatch features are a bit easier to use. Just navigate to the stopwatch mode and hit the button to start and stop. Both watches also have second time zone tracking features available in the digital display, but the Timex can only display one additional time zone indicated by the T2 on the display. You can set this time to anything you like. The Casio, however, has a much more in-depth world time feature, allowing you to cycle through 30 cities at any time and see the current time in that location. You do have to set the world time clock separately from your local time setting, but once it's set in one time zone, it will automatically change to the correct time for each of the preset cities as you cycle through them. You can also toggle daylight savings time on or off in the world time mode. Both watches also have alarm features with an hourly chime option. The Timex allows for setting one alarm for the main time and a second alarm for the second time zone. The Casio allows for setting up to 3 independent daily alarms, one of which also has a snooze function. One small feature that the Timex lacks that I do appreciate in the Casio is when you're cycling through the modes, the pitch of the beep is higher when you reach the default timekeeping mode. This lets you quickly cycle through to the main timekeeping display without having to look at the screen to confirm. It's just a small feature, but one that I notice when it isn't there. So this is a much closer matchup, with positives and negatives for both. But we haven't talked about one of the most important features of any watch, and that's setting the time. The Timex has the advantage of familiarity here. To set the analog hands, you just pull the crown and set the time like any other analog watch. The time and date on the digital screen will have to be set separately using the buttons, but the analog hands are super simple to set. The Casio is a bit more complicated, but not too bad once you get used to it. You just have to navigate to the HS mode, which stands for hand setting mode, then hold A until the display flashes, then press or hold down the lower right button to advance the hands. If the hands need to move several hours, pressing both right side buttons simultaneously will lock the hands into high-speed advance mode until you press any button, so you don't have to keep the button pressed the entire time. This is a much more awkward and complicated way to set the hands than the Timex, but luckily you shouldn't have to do it too often. One point I didn't mention about the Casio FT-500 in the previous comparison is that in order to power that gloriously bright LED light, the watch uses two batteries, an SR920SW for the timekeeping and a CR1616 battery for the light. This does complicate battery changes compared to the Timex, which uses only one CR2016 battery. The Casio AW-80 runs on one CR2025 battery and should last quite a long time since the dial states 10-year battery on it. So where does that leave us? These watches both have their pros and cons. As far as my personal opinion, I prefer the looks of the Timex. It has a rugged, classic look, and I prefer the more purposefully integrated look of the digital screen. I also like the ease of setting the analog time, and I like the orange second hand of the Timex. The Expedition also has what I consider a better strap system with a traditional buckle, and I enjoy having a timing bezel. Not to mention, the Indiglow backlight is useful and always a treat to use. As for the Casio, it has much better world time features, allowing for switching between 30 different cities with a touch of a button without having to reset anything. It has more alarm features available with a snooze option, and a somewhat unique and useful telememo feature that allows you to store and quickly retrieve information. This is a close call for me. As a daily watch, I'd probably lean toward the Timex, but some of the features of the Casio can come in very useful, especially when traveling. Luckily, I don't have to choose one over the other. Both of these watches have different things to offer, and I appreciate each of them. I can say that all three of these watches will be staying in my collection for sure. Do you have a clear preference between these two watches? If so, let me know why in the comments. I hope this comparison was a little more fair, and I'm really glad I decided to revisit this one and add this Casio AW-80 to the collection. As always, I want to thank you all for watching, and no matter which of these watches you may prefer, make the rest of your day worthwhile.